Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to another story time. It is already the end of February. It is almost March. So, pretty soon, Storytime is going to stop talking about wintertime stories and start talking about springtime stories. But one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately has to do with something that's usually very, very small. So, when you've been out on your nature walks recently, I want you to stop and think for a second. Have you seen any insects out and about while you're out walking? Have you seen any butterflies or bees or moths or dragonflies, mosquitoes, even ants? Probably not, huh? We typically don't see those things during the winter time. But why? Where did all of our insects go during winter? We've talked a lot in our story times and in our nature walks about how some animals might migrate or go someplace else during the winter so that they can find enough food and that they can stay warm. But it would be really hard for most of our insects to migrate. Some of them do, and we'll talk about them later. But it would be hard for an ant, right, to walk all the way down to Texas, so they must do something else. Okay, we've talked about how some of our animals hibernate or sleep through winter, and maybe we'll see some insects that do something very similar. And we've also talked about how some of our animals adapt, right? Or they get things that are going to help them through winter. Like deer might grow a really thick coat that helps them stay warm during winter. Okay, so we're going to think about those things as we read our story today about what insects do during winter. And I want you to be thinking about those, we call them winter survival strategies, adapt or migrate or hibernate, and which ones you see happening in our book here. Okay, so our story today is called Not a Buzz to Be Found, Insects in Winter. And it was written by Linda Glasser and illustrated by Jamie Zollers. My book is pretty little today, so I'll make sure to bring it up nice and close so you can see the illustrations. In summer, insects are all around, zipping, buzzing, zooming everywhere. But in winter, poof, they're all gone. Not a zip or a buzz or a zoom anywhere. Where do insects go when it's icy and cold? What do they do to survive? If you were a little insect, what would you do to stay alive? I bet some of you know what this insect is. A monarch butterfly. If you were a monarch butterfly, you'd take an amazing flight. You'd fly thousands of miles, migrating south where it doesn't freeze. There, you'd join millions of monarchs all gathered together in trees. So our monarchs fly all the way down to mountains in Mexico. So that's really far when you're only this big, right? What if you were a woolly bear caterpillar? You'd hide under a blanket of snow or leaves. Someday you'd turn into a moth with wings. But in winter you'd curl up and sleep, sleep, sleep. And you see the woolly bears? So these caterpillars that we often see crawling around in the fall are sleeping or hibernating in a way under the leaves of the forest. It's a good reason why it's really important to not rake your yard in the fall, because that leaf litter is really important for a lot of our overwintering insects. If you were a ladybird beetle, you'd hide under logs or leaves and huddle with thousands of others. You'd barely move or breathe. Okay, so another kind of type of insects that kind of hibernate. What if you were a honeybee? You'd eat the sweet honey in your hive and huddle with all the other bees. You'd all stay warm together, each taking turns in the warmest spot, the center. So they store honey to eat all winter and then stay warm by huddling together. So these bees are adapting for winter. They're doing something different that's going to help them survive. If you were a morning cloak butterfly, you'd hide under the bark of a tree and go into a deep, deep sleep. But you wouldn't freeze. Why not? You'd have something inside you, like antifreeze. Okay. So some of our frogs can do this too. They make a chemical inside their body that prevents them from freezing, which is super cool. You can find them in the bark. What if you were a praying mantis? You'd still be an egg in a small egg case with hundreds of others waiting to hatch. All winter long you'd stay snug and safe. If you were a common pondhawk dragonfly, you'd still be a baby nymph without wings. So a nymph is one of the life cycle stages of an insect, and that's what we call a baby dragonfly. You'd look like a small water bug and live in a pond way down in the mud. So some of you might have come to a program last year where I had dragonfly nymphs that you got to see. If you were an ant in winter, you'd stay underground in your nest with the other ants in your colony, safe from the cold. You'd all just rest. If you were a gall fly in winter, you'd still be a baby living in a gall. You'd chew a little opening to get out in the spring, but all winter you'd stay in that small, round ball. At that same program I mentioned with dragonflies, we dissected a gall to see what was inside, and we found this little bug in there. And this is a fun activity you can do at home, and I'll talk more about that at the end. What if you were a field cricket? You'd still be a tiny egg that mother cricket laid. All winter long you'd stay in the earth, safely hidden. You'd wait and wait and wait. What if you were a bald-faced hornet queen? You'd crawl into a rotting log and hide. You'd stay fast asleep all winter with your baby eggs safe inside you. So this queen hasn't laid her eggs yet. If you were a black swallowtail butterfly, you'd still be a caterpillar without any wings. Inside your chrysalis, safely hidden, you would sleep all winter, just waiting for spring. Can you see the chrysalis? Here's another one. Another one. They're very well camouflaged or hidden in their surroundings so that nothing eats them. Then slowly, slowly, the air grows warmer, and just as slowly, the days grow longer. You feel a change in the air, and so do insects everywhere. Some wake up, some hatch, some fly north, some grow wings. It's time to zip and buzz and fly. Winter is over. At last, it is spring. We have more information about some of the animals in our book. I won't read through all of that, but I do want to just quickly go through and look at some of the different strategies that they use to survive. So we talked about how for most insects it would be really hard to migrate or go somewhere else because insects are so small and they have to travel so far. But our monarch caterpillars, or monarch butterflies, are one of the insects that do that. Our green darner dragonflies also migrate. So a couple of our insects do fly away somewhere else for winter. Now, these same insects probably aren't the ones that are going to come all the way back to Minnesota. So the butterfly that goes and overwinters in Mexico is going to live there for months, and it's going to start its return journey, and it might maybe get to Texas before it's going to stop and lay eggs. And those eggs are going to hatch and turn into caterpillars, and then that next, when it turns into a butterfly, that butterfly is going to continue flying north and might stop somewhere else and lay eggs. And those eggs are going to hatch into caterpillars and then grow into butterflies. And those butterflies are going to continue north. So it can take a few generations of butterflies to get back up here, all the way in Minnesota or Wisconsin. Some of our butterflies overwinter in different life stages. So the adult monarch butterfly migrates. Here we have a moth, the woolly bear caterpillar, that stays in winter as a caterpillar. And we also saw the mourning cloak butterfly. And it's hard to see in this picture. You can see just the wings of the adult butterfly. So some are going to overwinter as adults, and we saw some that were in a chrysalis too. So they might stay here in different life stages, and those life stages are adapted for winter. And depending on what species of butterfly it is, they're going to overwinter in different stages depending on what they're adapted for. Some might be caterpillars, some might be eggs, some might be adults, and some might be in their chrysalis. It just depends on what species they are. That's true for a lot of our insects. We saw our field crickets were overwintering in eggs in the soil, but our dragonflies were overwintering in their baby stages or nymphs in the water. So some of our insects that fly around in the air are actually aquatic or live in the water when they're little, which is pretty crazy to think about, right? A baby dragonfly has gills like a fish does, but an adult dragonfly breathes air like we do. So lots of things can change, and our insects have had to get really crafty with how they survive winter. So for long periods of time, they've evolved lots of different adaptations to help them survive. Okay, so I always think it's really cool to see those different options in this book. I am going to put some resources out for you this week. One of the activities that I mentioned already that you could do at home is doing a gall dissection. So if you go out into a field and you find some old goldenrod plants, you'll find that some of them have a big ball on the stem. Okay, and those plants are the dead plants from last year, so they're really easy to break off. And just take one home with you. These little bugs are an important part of our food chain, so we don't want to take all the galls from an area because birds, and you might find some of these, that woodpeckers have already pecked open and eaten out the bug in the middle. But if you find one that doesn't have a hole chewed into it, you can take it home and make sure mom or dad or an adult at home, grandma, grandpa, whoever it might be, help you to gently cut open your gall. So if you use an X-Acto knife or a box cutter, or the adult, I should say, uses an X-Acto knife or a box cutter, and just makes a little slit and wiggles it in there a little, you should be able to pop it open. If you cut all the way through, you might accidentally cut what's inside. So you got to do it really careful and gently, but take a look inside your gall and see if you can find anything living in there. I think at the end, it's going to look just like a little grub, but if we were to wait until the spring, it would emerge from the gall as this type of gall fly, they called. Okay. I'll put some other activities in there for you as well, but spring is coming, so we're going to start seeing insects again, which is, I think, really exciting. It gives us something to look for on our walks. We talked in the book about how some of our butterflies overwinter as adults, and those are the butterflies that we are going to see first, flying around at least. You might find other caterpillars or things like that, chrysalis, but the adult butterflies that were adults during the winter are the ones that we're going to see right away in the spring. They're going to warm up, they're going to wake up, they're going to start flying around and look for a place to lay their eggs. So in my book here, this is called the phenology flight chart for butterflies. And I can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 butterflies that overwinter as adults. And we can start seeing them as early, I don't know if you can see this here, as late March in start flying around. So the flight chart means when they're adults and they're flying. So the mourning cloak, the Compton tortoiseshell, eastern comma, gray comma, and Milbert's tortoiseshell all overwinter as adults, and they'll be out already as early as March. Okay, so when on a nice warm sunny day, keep an eye out for those types of butterflies and any other insects that might be emerging. Again, a lot of our insects are spending winter in water. So if you go near open water in the spring, take a look in the water, see what bugs are starting to move around in there, or maybe even above the water. Maybe some are hatching out and starting to fly around already. Right? Anyway, check out those resources down below. Thank you for joining us for our last story time of February, and we'll see you again in March for a spring story. Have a good week. Bye.